Welcome to Whispers of the Guilty, where we delve deep into the darkest corners of human nature and uncover the most chilling tales of crime and punishment. I'm your host, SyLence, guiding you through the intricate webs of murder, mystery, and mayhem. Today, we embark on a spine-chilling journey into the life and crimes of one of Russia's most notorious serial killers, Alexander Pichushkin, infamously known as the Chessboard Killer. Our story unfolds in the sprawling, enigmatic expanse of Bitsevsky Park in Moscow, a place that hides secrets among its shadowy paths and ancient trees. Pichushkin's tale is not for the faint of heart. It's a saga of obsession and darkness, where the strategic game of chess becomes a sinister blueprint for murder. With each move, each calculated decision, will reveal how Pichushkin aimed to fill the 64 squares of a chessboard, each square representing a life brutally taken. Join me as we trace Pichushkin's chilling transformation from an ordinary child to a predator stalking the heart of Moscow. Discover the mind of a killer whose grim ambition was not just to murder, but to outdo Russia's most prolific serial killers in a morbid tally of death. But this is more than just a tale of horror. It's a story about the failures and triumphs of law enforcement, the resilience of a community haunted by fear, and the human ability to seek justice against overwhelming darkness. So, tune in, hold tight, and prepare to uncover the truth behind the chessboard that mapped out one of the most gruesome episodes in criminal history. This is Whispers of the Guilty, and this is the story of Alexander Pichushkin, the Chessboard Killer. In the heart of Moscow, beneath the dense canopy of Bitsevsky Park, the crisp autumn air carried a sinister chill, foreboding and thick with the scent of decaying leaves. This vast expanse of nature, a refuge from the bustling city, was about to witness a malevolent transformation, becoming the stage for a series of events that would terrify a nation. Alexander Pichushkin had always been a loner. From a young age, he was more at home among the chess pieces than with his peers. The game was his refuge, the board a world where he could exert absolute control, manipulating outcomes with the precision of a maestro. Born on April 9, 1974, in the humble outskirts of Moscow, Pichushkin's childhood was unremarkable at first glance. His parents, typical Soviet workers, were often absent, engrossed in their jobs, leaving young Alexander to his devices. The defining moment of his early years, however, was a severe blow to the head he suffered during a playground accident. The injury was severe enough to require hospitalization, and those who knew him noted a change in his demeanor thereafter. The once quiet but genial boy became increasingly withdrawn, his isolation deepening with each passing year. Yet, his intellectual capacity seemed only to sharpen, particularly his affinity for chess, which grew into an obsession. As he matured into adolescence, Pichushkin's fascination with chess evolved into something darker. He began to view the world through a binary lens of predators and prey, a philosophy he extended beyond the chessboard. His thoughts, once occupied by strategies of attack and defense, now harbored macabre fantasies of domination and control. Pichushkin completed his schooling with little fanfare and took a job at a local grocery store, a position that required minimal interaction with others, suiting his solitary nature. However, the monotony of daily life did little to quell the storm brewing within him. His true respite continued to be his daily visits to Bitsevsky Park, where he would play chess with unsuspecting retirees. The park, with its labyrinthine paths and secluded nooks, became his sanctuary, a place where his mind roamed free among dark thoughts. By the late 1990s, Pichushkin had taken to wandering the park not just for solace or chess, but for something far more sinister. He began to watch the park's visitors with a predator's interest, studying their habits and noting when and where they were most alone. It was during one such observation that he encountered Mikhail, an elderly man who frequented the park to feed the birds. Mikhail, with his stooped posture and gentle demeanor, became an object of Pichushkin's interest, not for any particular reason, other than his regularity and solitude. One chilly evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the twisted branches of the trees, Pichushkin made his approach. "Good evening," he had said, voice calm, betraying none of his inner turmoil. "I see you here often. Do you play chess?" Mikhail, ever welcoming and starved for company, nodded with a smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Yes, I used to play quite a bit in my younger days," he replied, setting aside his bag of breadcrumbs. "Would you care for a game?" Pichushkin asked, gesturing toward a nearby bench where an abandoned chessboard lay between two vacant chairs. The board, with its pieces set in ready positions, seemed almost a relic, waiting for them. As they played, Pichushkin felt a surge of exhilaration. Here he was, in control, orchestrating every move, every strategy with precision. But as the game progressed, his thoughts wandered from the checkered battlefield to the darker game he yearned to play, a game that involved life and death, not kings and pawns. The evening waned, and the park grew quiet, the usual crowds thinning until only the occasional late jogger or dog walker passed by. It was then, under the guise of a shared drink to warm themselves against the cold, that Pichushkin made his first move in what would become a horrifying sequence of events. Offering Mikhail a swig from a bottle of vodka, ostensibly to toast a game well played, he watched closely as the old man took a generous gulp. The alcohol, laced with a potent sedative, took effect quickly. Mikhail's words slurred, his eyelids drooped, and soon he was leaning heavily on the bench, unconscious. Pichushkin's heart raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. Dragging Mikhail's limp body into a more secluded part of the park, under the cover of darkness, he felt an overwhelming sense of power. This first act, brutal and devoid of hesitation, set the stage for what would become a long and grim chapter in the annals of Russian criminal history. As Mikhail's breaths became shallow and sporadic under Pichushkin's relentless assault, the chessboard killer was born. Over the next decade, the park would become Pichushkin's macabre playground. With each victim, he refined his methods, each act more daring than the last. The community around Bitsevsky Park lived in a state of growing fear, whispering rumors of the darkness that lurked among the seemingly benign paths and trees. As the body count grew, so did Pichushkin's arrogance. He kept a meticulous record of his victims, marking each murder with a cross on his apartment's chessboard, each square a silent testament to a life violently taken. But as is the fate of those who fly too close to the sun, his downfall was imminent, lurking just on the periphery of his carefully constructed game. The day of reckoning would come, but not before the chessboard was nearly complete, each square filled but one. Pichushkin's story, a grim tapestry of human frailty and monstrous capability, was far from over, each move calculated, each outcome deadly. As the years turned, the chill winds of Bitsevsky Park whispered tales of missing souls, tales that became as much a part of the landscape as the gnarled trees and winding paths. With each disappearance, the local newspapers churned out stories filled with speculation and fear, casting shadows over the hearts of Moscow's citizens. Yet for Alexander Pichushkin, each story was a silent accolade, a testament to his cunning and control. His apartment, cluttered with chess books and old newspapers, bore the true evidence of his obsession. The chessboard, now nearly filled with meticulously placed marks, stood as a grim scoreboard of his exploits. To him, each cross was not just a victory, but a step closer to completing his macabre mission. He longed for the day when all 64 squares would be filled, a day he believed would crown him as the greatest serial killer Russia had ever seen. On a particularly foggy evening, as the park lay shrouded in a thick, almost palpable mist, Pichushkin set out with a new sense of purpose. His steps were measured, his breath calm despite the adrenaline that coursed through his veins. He had spotted his next victim days earlier, a young woman who often jogged through the park in the evenings. She was different from his usual targets, younger and perhaps more vigilant, but Pichushkin relished the challenge. It added a new thrill to the game, a complexity that he was eager to master. The woman, Anna, was a university student who found solace in her evening runs, a time to clear her mind and escape the pressures of academic life. She was unaware of the figure who had watched her for days, studying her routine with predatory interest. As she laced up her running shoes and set out into the cool evening, her mind was occupied with the stress of upcoming exams, not the dangers that lurked within the park's enigmatic embrace. Pichushkin watched from the shadows as Anna entered the park, her figure a fleeting shadow against the misty backdrop. He followed at a distance, moving with an eerie stealth that belied his size. His heart pounded not with fear, but with anticipation, each step bringing him closer to his next conquest. As Anna rounded a familiar bend, the path took her into a particularly secluded part of the park. It was here that Pichushkin made his move. Breaking from the cover of the trees, he approached her with a jogger's gait, feigning a friendly smile as he drew alongside her. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" he remarked casually, trying to match her pace. Startled, Anna glanced at him, her instincts immediately on edge. "Yes, quite," she replied curtly, increasing her speed in the hope that he would fall away. But Pichushkin was persistent. "I've seen you running here often. I find it's better to run with someone, don't you think? Safer too in these parts," he prodded, his voice a carefully modulated blend of concern and camaraderie. Anna's pace quickened, her mind racing. Something about the man felt off. His presence was incongruous, his timing too coincidental. As her heartbeat quickened, not from the run but from a mounting sense of danger, she made a split-second decision. "I'm actually just finishing up," she said, veering off the path towards a more populated area of the park. Pichushkin's eyes narrowed, his plan thwarted by her sudden departure. He watched her retreat, his mind churning with frustration. She was the first to escape his grasp, a deviation in his otherwise flawless game. It was a new, unsettling feeling, but it did not deter him. Instead, it fueled his determination, igniting a darker flame within his psyche. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Pichushkin's obsession with Anna grew. He revisited the park night after night, his eyes scouring the mist for her silhouette. It became a fixation, one that overshadowed the chessboard and its remaining empty squares. Anna had become the elusive queen in his deadly game of chess, the one piece that refused to yield to his tactics. One evening, as the autumn leaves began to blanket the park in hues of orange and red, Pichushkin spotted her again. His heart leapt with a grotesque joy, his plans quickly reforming with renewed vigor. This time, he would not fail. He had prepared meticulously, studying her movements and patterns with an obsessive detail. As Anna jogged along her usual route, the sense of being watched crept over her again. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, a primal warning that something was amiss. She quickened her pace, her breaths becoming ragged with effort and fear. The park was quieter than usual, the usual throng of evening walkers noticeably thinner. She considered turning back, but the thought of admitting fear and defeat kept her moving forward, unaware that each step took her closer to Pichushkin's snare. Pichushkin had planned every detail, anticipating her moves with a hunter's precision. As she neared the secluded bend, he stepped out onto the path, blocking her way. His appearance was no longer friendly. Instead, it bore the grim certainty of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "Why do you run?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. The question was not meant for her, but for himself, a philosophical query into the nature of fear and survival. Anna froze, her instincts screaming at her to flee, to escape the danger that stood so palpably before her. But Pichushkin was prepared for her flight. With a swift move, he lunged forward, his hands outstretched not in greeting but in aggression. The struggle was brief, but fierce. Anna fought with a desperate strength, her survival instincts in full force. Pichushkin, however, fueled by his obsession and anger, was overpowering. Dragging her off the path, he intended to silence her forever, to reclaim his control and complete his dark game. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As they struggled, a group of late-night joggers turned onto the path, their voices loud and carefree. Startled by the sudden potential witnesses, Pichushkin hesitated, a fatal flaw in his otherwise meticulous plan. Seizing the moment, Anna broke free, her scream piercing the night as she ran towards the safety of the approaching group. Pichushkin retreated into the darkness, his breath heavy with rage and defeat. Anna's escape was more than a mere setback. It was a profound humiliation, a crack in the facade of his invincibility. As he disappeared into the shadows, the chessboard's empty squares mocked him, a reminder of his failure. Yet, this encounter, far from deterring him, only deepened his resolve. The game was not over, it had merely changed. Pichushkin's methods would have to evolve, his strategies recalibrated. He would not be denied his victory, his completion of the chessboard. The hunt would continue, more cautious and cunning than ever, until the park, his dark domain, yielded its final prey. The night air was tinged with the iron scent of rain, a storm brooding on the horizon as if nature itself sensed the tumult brewing beneath the serene facade of Bitsevsky Park. Alexander Pichushkin's shadow melded with the darkening woods, his figure a ghostly presence among the ancient trees. The failure with Anna had left a bitter taste, a reminder of his mortality and fallibility. But it also rekindled the fires of his obsession, pushing him deeper into the abyss of his dark desires. Pichushkin's strategy required adjustment, a new approach that would not only restore his confidence, but also ensure he remained undetected. He could not afford another slip, another witness to his deeds. The park, once a playground of possibilities, now posed a risk with each encounter. His need to complete the chessboard was as pressing as ever, but now he proceeded with a heightened sense of caution, each step measured, each potential victim scrutinized with meticulous care. Over the next few weeks, Pichushkin's sightings in the park became less frequent. He spent long nights hunched over his chessboard at home, playing game after game against himself, each move a rehearsal for the real-life maneuvers he planned to execute. Chess was no longer just a pastime, it was a simulation of life and death, a way to sharpen his mind for the challenges that lay ahead. His return to the park was calculated, timed to coincide with the early hours of the morning when the mist was thickest, cloaking his movements in a blanket of secrecy. He chose his victims with a predator's instinct, targeting those whose absence would not immediately alarm or invite scrutiny. Drifters, the homeless, those solitary souls who wandered the park's paths as if they too were lost in a game of survival, became his new prey. One such soul was Ivan, an elderly man whose life had been worn down by years of hardship and solitude. Ivan frequented the park in the early mornings, collecting discarded bottles to exchange for a few rubles. His presence was as much a part of the landscape as the benches he slept on, unnoticed by most, but not by Pichushkin. Their encounter was brief, a silent transaction of fate. Pichushkin approached Ivan with a bottle of vodka, the same lure he had used so many times before. The old man, wary yet weakened by need, accepted the drink with a nod, his eyes reflecting a life of resigned acceptance. As they sat on a frost-covered bench, the chessboard killer beside his unsuspecting victim, Pichushkin played the part of a concerned fellow soul, his voice soft, almost compassionate. "Cold morning, isn't it? This should warm us up," he murmured, handing Ivan the bottle. Ivan took a long swig, the alcohol a temporary salve against the chill. He didn't notice the slight shift in Pichushkin's demeanor, the momentary tightening of his jaw, the predatory glint in his eyes. As the sedative mixed with the vodka took effect, Ivan's head began to droop, his body slackening with the fast-approaching darkness of unconsciousness. Pichushkin watched with cold detachment as Ivan collapsed onto the bench, his body now just an object to be disposed of. Dragging him into the underbrush, Pichushkin felt a resurgence of control, the thrill of the hunt restoring his shaken confidence. With methodical brutality, he ended Ivan's life, each strike a macabre echo of the chess games he played in solitude. The deed done, Pichushkin left the body concealed under a pile of leaves, a makeshift grave in the park that had become his domain. As he walked away, his mind was already moving on, planning the next move, the next victim. The chessboard at home awaited another mark, another step towards his dark goal. But as the body count rose, so too did the attention of the Moscow police. The pattern of disappearances and the few bodies that had been discovered prompted a quiet intensification of patrols in and around Bitsevsky Park. The media, ever eager for a sensational story, began to draw connections, weaving narratives of a serial killer at large, a phantom preying on the vulnerable. Pichushkin was aware of the increasing scrutiny, the tightening net of law enforcement. He followed the news with a detached interest, a spectator to the public's growing fear and fascination. To him, it was another element of the game, another layer of risk that made his pursuits all the more exhilarating. He knew he needed to be careful, to plan each step with even greater precision. The chessboard was nearing completion, a testament to his perseverance and cunning. Yet each new mark was a gamble, each move a potential misstep that could lead to his undoing. The game was far from over, and Alexander Pichushkin was not ready to concede defeat. The park, with its hidden paths and dark corners, still held many opportunities, and he was determined to explore each one. With the resolve of a grandmaster facing a worthy opponent, Pichushkin embraced the challenges ahead, each decision, each action calculated with the cold logic of a player who knew the value of patience and the thrill of the hunt. As the seasons changed, the leaves turning from gold to bare, stripped by the harsh Russian winter, Pichushkin's chessboard filled up, square by dark square. The end was in sight, but so was the possibility of capture. It was a dual edge that cut deep into the fabric of his twisted reality, each day a step closer to either ultimate triumph or inevitable downfall. The park waited, silent and expectant, for the final moves to be played, the last pieces to fall. The game, as deadly as it was intricate, continued under the watchful eyes of a city paralyzed by fear, its conclusion as yet unwritten in the frosted earth of Bitsevsky Park. Moscow's winters were harsh, the cold biting into the very bones of the city, turning the once vibrant Bitsevsky Park into a desolate landscape of snow and silence. Alexander Pichushkin's breath formed clouds of mist as he walked the familiar paths, his steps muffled by the thick layer of snow that blanketed the ground. The park was quiet, its usual throng of visitors deterred by the freezing temperatures, creating an eerie solitude that matched Pichushkin's cold resolve. The chessboard at his apartment was nearly complete. Only a few squares remained empty, each one a haunting reminder of the endgame that was rapidly approaching. Pichushkin had become more cautious, his movements more calculated as the police presence around the park intensified. Each venture out was a calculated risk, each potential victim scrutinized with a predator's precision. He could not afford a mistake, not when he was so close to achieving his grim goal. The thrill of the hunt had escalated into a compulsive need to fill the chessboard, to fulfill the dark ambition that had consumed him for years. On a particularly bleak afternoon, as the sky threatened more snow, Pichushkin spotted her, Elena, a young artist who found inspiration in the stark beauty of the winter park, her sketch pad filled with the charcoal outlines of leafless trees and snow-covered benches. She was an occasional visitor, her appearances in the park random but memorable to Pichushkin, who had noticed her months ago. Elena's solitude and focus on her art made her an ideal target, a fact that Pichushkin noted with a chilling sense of anticipation. He approached her under the guise of an art enthusiast, his manner friendly and unassuming. "Your work is beautiful," he commented, nodding towards the sketch pad as she looked up, startled by his sudden presence. "Do you mind if I watch? I find art fascinating, but sadly lack any talent myself." Elena, flattered and somewhat relieved by the polite interest, smiled and nodded, her guard momentarily lowered. "Thank you. I'm just trying to capture the winter mood of the park," she replied, her voice tinged with the loneliness of someone used to working in isolation. Pichushkin watched her draw, his mind not on the art but on his plan. As the conversation flowed, he subtly steered her away from the open path to a more secluded bench, one that he knew was out of the usual patrol routes and hidden from casual view by a copse of dense trees. The artist, absorbed in her work and the unexpected company, did not notice the gradual change in Pichushkin's demeanor, the shift from curious observer to something far more sinister. When he offered her a drink from his flask, claiming it was just tea to warm them in the cold, she accepted without hesitation, grateful for the warmth. The drug-laced tea took effect quickly, clouding Elena's senses, slowing her reactions. As her grip on the sketch pad loosened, Pichushkin moved with practiced ease, his actions smooth from repetition. Dragging her to a hidden part of the park, he felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with a profound sense of inevitability. This was his destiny, the completion of his life's work, marked by each life he took. As he prepared to strike, the quiet of the park was shattered by the sound of distant voices, the laughter of children sledding on a nearby hill, a reminder of the world outside his darkened thoughts. Pichushkin paused, the moment of humanity flickering within him, but it was quickly extinguished by the overwhelming drive to continue his mission. Elena, semi-conscious and confused, barely comprehended her peril. Her thoughts were muddled, a jumbled mix of fear and disbelief as the shadow of death loomed over her. Pichushkin, however, was resolute, his actions deliberate as he silenced her forever, her unfinished sketches scattering around them like fallen leaves. Leaving the scene with a calm that belied the violence of his actions, Pichushkin felt a complex mix of relief and anticipation. He was one step closer to completing his chessboard, the end now in clear sight. But as he walked away, his footsteps leaving deep impressions in the snow, he was unaware of the eyes that watched him from afar. A young detective, Mikhail, who had been following the case with a growing sense of urgency, had decided to patrol the park, driven by a gut feeling that the killer would strike again. From his hidden vantage point, he had observed Pichushkin's interaction with Elena, initially dismissing it as a benign encounter. However, as the minutes passed and his instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong, he approached, arriving just in time to see Pichushkin leaving the secluded area. Mikhail hurried to Elena's side, but it was too late. The horror of the scene was overwhelming, but it cemented his resolve. Radioing for backup, he set off after Pichushkin, his movements quick and silent on the snowy path. The chase was brief. Pichushkin, caught off guard and weighed down by the physical and emotional burden of his actions, was no match for the young, determined detective. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the chessboard killer looked up at the heavy sky, snowflakes beginning to fall, each one a silent witness to his downfall. The arrest of Alexander Pichushkin was a grim victory for Moscow's law enforcement, a case that would haunt the lives of many. The chessboard, with its final squares unfilled, remained in his apartment, a chilling reminder of a game that had ended not with triumph, but with capture. The park, once a place of beauty and solitude, slowly began to recover from the shadow of death that had lingered among its paths. The community relieved, yet forever changed by the darkness they had unknowingly harbored. As Pichushkin awaited his trial, the city wrestled with the aftermath of his reign of terror, each victim remembered, each family mourning. The story of the chessboard killer would live on, a stark narrative of madness and method, a somber reflection on the depths to which humanity can sink, and the enduring spirit that fights to emerge from the darkness. Thank you for joining me on this harrowing journey through the twisted mind of Alexander Pichushkin, the chessboard killer. We've navigated the dark paths of Bitsevsky Park and delved into the depths of a psyche consumed by a morbid challenge. This story, while chilling, serves as a poignant reminder of the complexities of human nature and the thin line between sanity and madness. As we close this chapter, let's reflect on the lives affected by Pichushkin's actions and remember the importance of vigilance and justice in safeguarding our communities. The bravery of those who stood up, the persistence of law enforcement, and the strength of the survivors and their families remind us of the resilience that can emerge from tragedy. If today's story moved you or sparked your interest in the unseen battles fought in the shadows of our society, please like, subscribe, and share this episode. Join us next time on Whispers of the Guilty as we uncover more true crime stories that challenge our perceptions and test the limits of our understanding. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and keep seeking the truth. This is SyLence, signing off. Remember, in the silence of the shadows, the truth often whispers the loudest. Goodbye for now.